Hello, secondary educators, and welcome to this overview of getting reading right, filling in the gaps in the secondary classroom. I'm Leslie Zaroya, Project Director for Reading Language Arts at LA County Office of Education, and I'm going to give you a brief overview of the course so you can decide if this is something you like to participate in with us. Okay, so here's a question, maybe a dumb question. Have you ever had a student whom you suspected struggled to read the material in your class? I would assume the answer is, of course, yes, and I'm thinking you likely have lots of kids who struggle. I know I certainly did when I was in the classroom, and so that is why this course was developed. So we can all learn ways to fill students' specific reading gaps. So we all know that there are many elements that come together to create a literate child. We can probably agree that all of these factors you see here play a part in the puzzle of reading. But to be honest, you really can remove any number of the other pieces like literate homes and love of reading. But if students have strong classroom reading instruction, they will still learn to read. If we remove systemic and explicit Tier 1 reading instruction from the puzzle, most children will never learn to read proficiently. It's the one essential factor that as educators that we actually have control over. And as secondary folks, we sort of assume that this is attended to in elementary. However, as a state, we've kind of struggled with K-5 reading instruction, and this is shifting now, which we'll go into in just a minute. So a few years ago, as a county office, we wanted to support K-5 reading instruction by bringing the science of reading research to teachers. We began with an elementary cohort of Getting Reading Right, and that project is now in its third year. And we're seeing districts all over the state changing how they teach reading to a more systematic, phonics-based approach called structured literacy. We were also awarded a $5 million grant for that work, and now county offices across the state are using our training to build a shared understanding of how to teach reading effectively in elementary. Through that, though, we had a lot of secondary folks attending our K-5 training because they wanted to learn about it too. And as a former middle school teacher, I understood this because I never had any training about how to actually teach older students to read. I mean, things like giving a diagnostic assessment to older kids and then having strategies or any curriculum or resources to address those specific older kids' reading gaps. No, I had none of that. And in fact, I actually taught an entire reading elective to sixth and seventh graders, which I now refer to as a stab in the dark, teaching reading by the seat of your pants. I don't know if any of you have tried to do that, but anyway, I had no real idea of what I was doing. And so I did a lot of let's read a lot, let's read more, I'll read to you, and let me use lots of scaffolds and graphic organizers, which surprisingly did not fix the problem. So fast forward to learning about the science of reading in my work here at LACO, and now we actually do know what to do. So all of that led us to the Getting Reading Right, Filling in the Gaps in the Secondary Classroom series, which we hope you will want to join us for. This training is for any secondary teacher who wants to know what to do to help struggling readers in their classroom. It's not program or curriculum specific, and the strategies really do apply in any discipline. So let's think for a minute what a struggling older reader looks like. So for you, what comes to mind? Think about that for a second. So likely some of these things came up for you. Well, maybe they don't like to read. Maybe their vocabulary is limited. Maybe their behavior problems. I know I saw a lot of that because it's much less embarrassing to get in trouble for fooling around than to show folks that you can't read well. So let's think about that and hop into the shoes of an older struggling reader for just a moment. So we tend to think that if kids can read with, let's say, 80% accuracy, that sounds pretty good, right? And that's, we think of it in terms 80% is like a B in our grading system. So they should be okay if they can read with B level accuracy. So I'm going to give you a sentence from chapter 1 of the Scarlet Letter that is how a kid with 80% accuracy would understand it. All right, so go ahead and try to read this passage. So, did you notice how difficult it was to try and get through that quickly? I noticed I couldn't even remember what I read because the unknown words were took too much of my attention. I was trying to decode those words, and I didn't even know once I was able to say them out loud what they really meant. So, I don't know about you, but my main sentiment after reading this was, "Holy smokes, yikes, that was hard." So that's what it feels like to read with 80% proficiency, with which doesn't sound that bad. So let's try now with 90% and see how you do. Read this. A little easier, right? But still pretty cloudy for comprehending. I was able to read it much more fluently, and I could attend to the meaning in between those red words since there were fewer of them. But in this scenario, I could get the gist of it, but it's not super clear by any means. I would not have full proficiency. So now let's take a look at what this passage looks like with 100% accuracy. Let's read that one. I bet you read it pretty quickly because your eyes and brain didn't have so many obstacles to stumble over. So we've just experienced what it's like to not read with fluency. It's so tough to imagine what being a struggling reader's like when you're already a skilled reader like we all are. And it's hard to remember what it was like learning to read. It almost feels like we should be able to just say to kids, just try harder, read more. But no amount of scaffolding or try harder was really going to make up for the fact that in that first example, especially, I couldn't make sense of any of those red words. So giving me a graphic organizer or some other scaffold or reading it aloud to me wouldn't really help me if I can't get through the majority of that passage on my own. So let's look at some ways that we try to cope with struggling readers. So the problem is that all of these strategies that you see coming in here are what we call compensatory strategies. They're well intended and they can get kids through text and are honestly what we in the secondary world have been taught to do. These are not bad. They're, as in terms of strategies to help them cope, but they don't fill reading gaps. And none of these strategies here would really help me on my own to fully comprehend that red text on the last slide. But what if we could actually give a quick assessment to older kids that showed us specifically what the problem is? That would be great, but it would still not be enough if I didn't have any strategies to use to fill those gaps. But what if I did? What if I had both a quick assessment that I could give kids that pinpointed their deficits and then also some strategies to fill those gaps? Would you do that? I think so. I would, mostly because it would mean that when those gaps are filled, and by the way, those gaps get filled really quickly with older kids. Kids no longer then need all those scaffolds and compensatory strategies. So my lesson can really focus on the content that I love and that I was trained to teach. So, how do we get to that? The path to that is really to learn about the science of reading and how the brain learns to read. Without that, we're just kind of guessing at students' problems and trying to help them limp along. So, I mentioned the term science of reading, and you may not have ever heard that term, but what it refers to is a huge body of scientifically based research about reading issues related to reading and writing. So, reading research from the last 5 decades is from a variety of fields, including psychology and neurology and linguistics, and of course, education. And there's a vast amount of evidence to inform how proficient reading and writing develop and why some students have difficulty and how we can most effectively assess and address reading issues. And this information, you're probably thinking, well, if it's been around for 5 decades, why don't we know about it? Well, this information really has not made it to the classroom teacher in California. It's just now spreading across the state through some of the grants that have been going on, like ours, and some concerted efforts by reading advocates like us and like others across the state. So we're excited about that for sure. So when we look at the brain science of how reading works, we see that unlike learning to speak and understand language, learning to read and write is not a natural process. Oral language is natural. We begin to speak as toddlers simply because we've been immersed in language. But that is not true for reading. You can't put a child in a room full of books and they magically learn to read. They have to learn the code. So, for example, this is what happens in the brain. When little kids learn a word like bat, first they have to hear the sounds, which is called phonemic awareness. And they have to match sounds to letters and know that B matches to B, A matches to A, and T is part of it, matches to T, and then they have to know that this word becomes bat. Sorry, I was stumbling over that. So they have to know sounds and then correspond them to letters and then put that together and blend that to become the word bat. And then they also have to be able to connect that to the meaning center in their brain and know that that can be either a mammal that flies or it can be a tool that you use in baseball. So what we're going to show you in this training is how this process works, not just for one syllable words in the primary grades, but also for learning multisyllabic words at any grade level. So we'll show how it breaks down for some students also, and what you can actually do about that. And we'll go more into this brain science every meeting when we go through each of the drill downs. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about those meetings. So what can you expect when you come to a training? So we have two models for delivering this curriculum. The first one is boot camp, where we meet from 8:30 to noon. So it's half days on Zoom, and you can join in your PJs if you want. This is usually in the summer. The course is 10 modules. So we do 2 modules a day and finish the whole thing in 1 week. So that's kind of the the quick version. That's why we call it boot camp. You know, it's all 5 days in a row, usually. We can break that model up and do, 2 sessions at different times during the year. So that's another way we can do boot camp. The most common way that we do it, though, is to meet once a month over the course of the school year for 90 minutes on Zoom. And we usually begin in August with the first meeting and then meet monthly through May. And this option is for those who want to take it a little slower and then kind of implement as you go. Most meetings will begin with a self-assessment on the day's topic, and we'll be asking you what you know about that topic before we begin. And we'll revisit the same self-evaluation at the end of the session to see how your knowledge has shifted. And those evaluations are really just for you. You don't turn them in. We don't see the results. They're just a way for you to kind of track your own learning. And each module will have a very specific topic that we'll be building your knowledge around. So sometimes we'll have articles to read, we may have videos, we have optional breakout rooms, and always some element of choice so you can engage in the content in the way that feels right for you on that particular day. So we never make you do a breakout if you don't feel like it. There's always options. We know that feeling. Sometimes you just are not in the mood to go into a breakout room. And other times you really want to talk to someone. So we always give you options. And then every session we'll be sharing instructional techniques and resources so that you can immediately put your new practice to learning. So this isn't just a knowledge building course. It's really about learning how to adapt instruction in ways that will meet the needs of your students and fill their reading gaps. So we'll end each session with action steps that you can take and an implementation guide so you can remember what we did each module, and then have some additional resources for when school is starting or when you're continuing your lessons and you begin implementing the work. And then finally, anyone who attends all the 5 days of the boot camp or all 10 sessions of the year-long version will earn our snazzy Getting Reading Right secondary badge, which you can add to your email signature or in LinkedIn or on your resume, and have a proud stamp to indicate the hard work and knowledge building you've been doing in order to ensure that all of your older readers gain proficiency in reading. So let's talk now about what do you actually do in the course of a module. So every module, we have kind of the same structure. We want you to understand the components of skilled reading and how those components apply to the secondary classroom. So we'll be learning about those progressive skills each month. So we'll be learning how to pinpoint specific reading gaps. So we're not just relying on those compensatory strategies. And then finally, every month we'll be discussing those practical, clear strategies that can be used in any content area for how to meet students' needs. And we don't want you thinking about it as a whole extra thing to add to what you're doing. It's really about strategies within what you're already doing that help kids access the material that you're using in your class. And it's worth mentioning that this Getting Reading Right course isn't only about filling gaps for kids who struggle with reading in our secondary classrooms. It's also about learning research-backed strategies for covering grade level content in a manner that assures accessibility, equity, and proficiency for every kid. And that's really something we've been missing for a long time. All right, so what else do you get in this course? We got all kind of goodies. So as part of the Filling in the Gap series, you'll be getting monthly self-evaluations that will help you keep track of your learning. You'll also be getting the implementation guides to close out every module, which will help highlight the key points from the session, as well as kind of a clear checklist of to-dos that will help you to take action on your new learning and assure that the series isn't just one of those boring sit and gets. We try to make it lively and engaging so that you're not bored to tears the whole time. And then the implementation guides also offer all kinds of additional resources where you can learn more about that topic or find links to activities and lessons and videos and podcasts and things. And then finally, all our participants will be receiving a fancy course themed notebook to capture learning from the series. So we also mentioned that throughout the year, we address the various components involved in skilled reading. So I want to show you kind of an overview of where we're headed. And this may be too much to look at. So if this is too much, just look away because I'm going to show you it in a couple of formats. But we wanted to show you some of the topics. And if you were like we had no idea what orthographic mapping was initially, but now we do, and you will too. So don't worry about it. If this looks kind of overwhelming and you're like, I've never heard of half of the stuff on here, don't worry about it. That's why we created this course and why we will be learning together. So also, for another idea of what those 10 meetings will look like. So here's kind of what each module will look like. We'll begin by learning about one of the progressive reading skills. So this pie chart here is discussing the prevalent issue with phonological awareness. So a lot of our struggling readers tend to have problems with phonological awareness, and we'll be discussing what that means. If you've never heard about phonological awareness, we'll be telling you. And then we'll talk about why it matters for older readers. We'll also look at what that looks like in a secondary kid. So here's a photo of an 8th grader's writing. And during that phonological awareness meeting, we'd take a look at this writing and evaluate how it gives us a window into the student's phonological awareness struggles. And then we'd spend a big chunk of time talking about how we're going to address that for any students who are struggling with that skill. And in this case, it's phonological awareness. And you see a packet here of strategies that we've put together for how do you address that in an older student and in a content classroom. So we've got lots of goodies for you. All right, so, and you're probably thinking, well, how do we know all these skills and where do they come from? Well, the major framework that we reference throughout our Getting Reading Right training is called Scarborough's Reading Rope. So the main rope is created by tightly weaving together 2 main cords. So you see here, there's the blue cord, which is called word recognition, and then there's the red cord, which is called language comprehension. And the goal is for all of these discrete skills underneath each of those ropes to come together for skilled reading. So we'll be spending our meetings going through each element of the rope to build our knowledge so we can become experts at filling in the gaps with students who have reading deficits. And you can see that the bottom portion of the rope consists of what we call finite skills. These are skills that students need to know to read words and to decode. And we know that we can pinpoint exactly which one of these skills students may be struggling with. And then we can teach that skill to mastery. So the blue part of the rope is really exciting because these are really finite skills that we can say, hey, a student is struggling with, let's say, phonological awareness. So we're going to fill that gap. We're going to, here's some strategies. Here's what it looks like. Here's some strategies to fill that gap. And then we can move on to the next skill deficit that they may have. Now for the red part of the rope at the top, the language comprehension side, those skills are infinite. So we continue learning about background knowledge and vocabulary and all of those things as we go throughout our life. But there are specific ways of introducing those red strands so that they're accessible to all students. And so we can assure proficiency for all of our students. So this is the model that we'll be grounding every single session in. You're going to see Scarborough's Reading Rope every month and probably get sick of it, but it's really useful. All right, the second framework that we're going to use, and we'll be circling back to each module, will be the simple view of reading. And we love the simple view of reading because it's presented here as a multiplication problem, and the two sides should look familiar. So we've got word recognition, which we just talked about as the blue side of the rope, and then times the language comprehension side of the rope. And so this multiplication equation shows that students need both strong word recognition and strong language comprehension to develop strong reading comprehension. In other words, in order to be able to read, they need to be able to read words and also know what they mean. But these are entirely different skills. And if either part of this equation is missing or weak, the end result will be that reading comprehension will suffer. And we really want all students to be strong in both areas. And so we're going to address both areas of the reading rope and talk about each one of those discrete skills in our time together. All right, so just a few other tidbits before we go. We have all kind of resources. We've built a website for getting reading right, all kinds of articles and videos and podcasts. And by the way, if you're a podcast listener, check out our Leading Literacy podcast. We have so many great episodes with reading experts and other experts. It's on Apple and Spotify, and we're in 35 countries, so we're totally legit. And interestingly, I see the stats on our downloads, and our most downloaded episode is actually the one where Jessica Sullivan and I talk about issues in older struggling readers. So we know this is a prevalent problem, and folks are really wanting to know how to address it effectively. So that's super exciting. And then, of course, we're active on social media, just like everyone. But you could go to our pages, any one of these, and see the kinds of events and things that we're doing. And we always give shout outs to everybody in our trainings. We post after each training and all of that. So check us out on any of these platforms. And then as we wrap up, we'd like to have you take in just this little quote here from Kareem Weaver. He's an educator. He was a teacher and principal up in the Oakland area, and he started an organization called Fulcrum. He's very much a literacy advocate. So take just a second and read this quote here. All right, so we're going to watch, just keep that quote that you just read in mind. We're going to end today by watching this brief promo for a great documentary called The Truth About Reading. It's recently been released, and it addresses literacy issues that really run deep in our country, and they show the devastating effects that it has on people. So take a second and just watch this.
So go ahead, take your time going down and just read me those words from the top to the bottom.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're right.
Bought, interested, knowledge, peace, euphemism. Unless I really dig deep into this one, I don't have an answer.
Really hard. The answer is really hard.
This seems like elementary school. I feel embarrassed.
All across this country, kids are not being taught how to read the words.
This is a misunderstanding that has to be exposed, that the system works for most kids and it's those few that fail. And that's a lie.
Look it up, it's everywhere. You will see over 60% of children are not reading at grade level proficiency.
I was definitely hiding. keeping this secret to myself because I was embarrassed. More than anything, I felt like a fraud.
I remember I was always nervous to get called on. The teacher would realize who would read the best. They would eventually just continue calling on that person to read. I would always struggle.
17 years I taught public high school in California. I could not read, write, or spell.
We've got large challenges here in America. No greater challenge than to make sure that every child, not just a few children, every child receive a first-class education.
The No Child Left Behind law. No Child Left Behind had us focused on standardized tests, which start in 3rd grade. So everyone was laser focused on 3rd grade and beyond, and kind of what was happening K1, 2, they lost track of it.
There's a notion, a belief that kids start to read because they've matured to the point where they're ready to start reading. Not correct.
The reading wars, should we be teaching kids phonics or what was termed whole language? The theory was they just need to memorize a whole bunch of words and that's what good readers do.
They say, no, it's all about comprehension. And I say, well, if they can't read the words, how can they comprehend? It's almost like suggesting that a child who was listening to Mozart all their life, you put them in front of a piano and you say, now you play Mozart.
Research is unequivocally solid that phonemic awareness is absolutely critical to reach your highest potential reading and in spelling. It's something that we use all the time when we're reading and we don't even know it.
It's a lot more than phonics. It's the mechanics of how to read.
My daughter's kindergarten year, I was in the classroom. I saw their teaching instruction. She had directed them away from the words. Look at the picture. Do you think it's a bear or is it a fox? It stopped me in my tracks because it was everything that I had taught myself to do to look like a good reader.
And so you have to ask yourself, if we have this data, if we have this knowledge, why does there have to be a war? When we know that the outcomes of us having that debate is literally the trajectory of someone's life.
If people only knew. Just totally tears you apart.
This entire issue requires a grassroots movement of parents and educators who are angry and who say enough is enough.
We're not done. We're not done. It's not too late.
Okay, so I love that. And I love that he says it's not too late because it really isn't. And so we hope that you will keep that in mind and join the movement with us. And we don't want any students to leave our school system unable to read proficiently. And that goes especially for our older students who are going to need these skills as they embark on their lives and careers outside of school. So the nation's really focusing on making the shift to structured literacy, and that same work is getting underway in California and across the state. And we're really excited to offer this training to secondary teachers who've really been looking for a concrete way to address the gaps with their older struggling readers, and especially in their content classes. So we look forward to working with you as thought and learning partners, and we hope that you'll join us in the training. So thanks so much for taking the time to watch this overview, and have a great rest of the school year.